Episode 91, Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down. In this episode, Andrew and Matthew welcome Bekah McNeel to talk about her book and the deconstruction that prompted it. Bekah is an engaging author and a delightful individual, and we both thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. We also highly recommend her book. It is insightful. Towards the end of this episode, we touch on Bekah's next book, and we hope to have her back when that is out. In the meantime, if you know someone, or you are someone, who can speak authoritatively on gun violence or on abortion, and how each are impacted by fundamentalist Christianity, then please get in touch. We are actively seeking out guests for both of these subjects. Reasonpress@gmail.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Still Unbelievable. I am your host, Andrew Knight, and with me is Matthew Taylor. Say hello, Matthew.
Hello, listeners. How are you?
Today, folks, we have the opportunity to have a truly delightful show. Over the last couple of weeks, Matthew and I have been reading the book, Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down. The author, Bekah McNeel, is here with us today. And Bekah, thank you for being willing to come on Still Unbelievable and talk to us about your book. Matthew and I, we both loved the book. Thank you for writing it.
Thank you for reading it.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. We both know that you have some journalism background. Let's hear about who you are. And then
Sure. Well, as implied by the title, I grew up in the evangelical American church. I'm from San Antonio, Texas. It's where I grew up. My family's all here, deep roots. And the church has always been part of those roots. I grew up in a really conservative branch of the Presbyterian church, and it has it was really enmeshed in the culture wars, trying to push away secularism in all forms and keep us pure and keep us intellectually subscribed, we'll say, to keep us in the fold in every way. And so that's how I grew up. I have, through education, through conflict, through relationships, through real life, and I would say through some unforced errors on the part of the evangelical American church, departed from a lot of what I used to believe, but more than that, and before that, how I used to position myself publicly, the social implications of my faith. And so that actually changed first, and I think the theology followed, which in the tradition I grew up with is big heresy. You don't do things that way. You start with belief and then you have implications. But I found love demanded certain things, and the theology had to accommodate. And then I got married to a natural born skeptic who encouraged all of this inquiry. And we have two very curious, very precocious, very pro-social children who have a lot of questions. And we've been on this journey together of figuring out what's the shape of our faith these days. And it's a journey, and it's changing a lot, but there's some core consistencies that we've managed to hold on to.
that's interesting. I will tell you right up front, this is something that a good Southern guy is never supposed to admit out loud. There was a point in your book when you were talking about some conflict between how you were brought up and how you wanted to parent your children. There was a point there where I had tears in my eyes. Thinking, it really struck a chord with me. And it struck a chord with me because I have been in that place where you were growing up incredibly conservative. I don't know if you knew anybody in the conservative churches of Christ.
Oh, wow. Yes.
Yeah. So you see, Matthew, you see, yeah. So that was my background, and so, spare the rod, spoil the child, all of that sort of thing. But I have a little girl, and I decided a long time ago that if any child that crossed my path learned to be struck by an adult, I would not be that adult. But that doesn't mean that influence from incredibly conservative upbringing and the ties to conservative Southern community are not there, and that there's some real lack of problem resolution without spanking a child.
Yes, yes.
And so I was really, really touched during that part of the book. And I was with you on that journey, and I think that's the power of writing, at least as well as you did it.
Well, thank you. And I'm so glad. The best thing is hearing from people who are wrestling with a lot of this stuff in their upbringing and who have been harmed by it, especially, or who have seen harm done and don't want to perpetuate that harm. It's been really, really great to hear that they said, yep, that's it. It was part of the journey and that rings true. And to find each other coming out of it. That's my goal, is that it can be really lonely to leave the faith that you grew up in. And it's made lonelier by a church telling you, if you leave, you'll lose your community. And I am hoping that people who read this book will find other people who read the book and say, you too, and find each other and feel less lonely.
So when you set out to write Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down, did you have in mind the path that the book took you on? Or were you exploring as you wrote the book? Because I couldn't tell how you were evolving as the book was evolving, if you see what I mean.
I do.
When you outlined the book, did it turn out like your outline?
That is such a good question. And you're the first person to articulate it. There's been a couple of people who said, like, the book lacks an internal consistency. Like, it sounds like she hasn't made up her mind.
Oh, I didn't say that at all.
I would never say that about that.
So just so you know, that is not what I was implying.
Okay. No, it's but you did pick up, and I the person the reviewer who made that comment, I had to laugh because I was like, well, of course I'm on a journey. I hope that every day I'm on a journey. And the part that kind of sucks about raising kids is that you hope that in 20 years you're a more evolved and informed and wise person, but your kids only get this version of you.
Yeah.
And so even in the course of writing that book, yes, I was talking to people and interviewing them and learning from their experiences and reading. And I draw a graph, in imaginary graph when I'm explaining this journey of, like, if you imagine one of those graphs that goes along a plane for a while, then drops precipitously, and then goes along straight for a little while, plateaus, and then drops again. That's kind of my deconstruction journey, or my faith journey has been seasons of things shaking up and falling apart. And then we find kind of stasis for a while, and we can operate in it. And I would say that writing this book precipitated another big drop, because I was like, oh, when I write this out, there's a so what that's demanded, or there's a, well, what about, there's the demand to be a little more thought out and logical than I am in my day-to-day life, where certain questions don't come up, or I can say, like, I don't really have all that worked out, but I'm just going to choose to love this person and not worry about the theology. When you're writing it all down, you kind of have to deal with a little bit more of that. And so there were things that once the book was out, I thought, wow, that really kind of started the ball rolling on a theological journey that wasn't really part of the book even. So yes, it was all evolving. And then since then, I would say because it's all very practical. I think it's all very much, the book is focused on decision, like the earthiness of raising kids. Like, there's spiritual questions and intellectual questions, but it's a lot about, like, so what are we going to do about this? And where does this break with loving people and prioritizing my relationship with my child when I'm being told by the church that I have to choose a certain kind of theology over the security of my child. That's what the book deals with. But then there's lots of just theological or doctrinal stuff since then that I've had to think through.
How long? Let's see. The book was published when exactly?
Came out October of 2022, so just a few months ago.
Right. This has been a really active journey for you then. If it feels like there's a lot in the last 4 months, my life feels that way too, right? Every day is, we live our lives constantly trying to salvage some sort of organization from chaos. Right?
Yes.
That's sort of how my house is. I think Matthew's better at it. I don't think Matthew has the sort of chaotic existence that I do. But
I just hide it better because I'm English, dude.
Oh,
yeah, I see a box leaning against a wall behind him.
Sorry, what was that?
I see a box leaning against a wall behind you. I recognize that chaos.
Yes, absolutely. This is my man cave. Chaos comes in here to get forgotten.
Well, even from the first chapter, I was intrigued. So that was how to lose the faith and keep it off. That was what a great title, right? So I was sort of hooked right there, and then to find someone that can quote Daniel Tiger and Florence and the Machine in the same book.
Parents' life.
It was right. So my girlfriend and I are both big Florence and the Machine fans, and we have a little girl that's still watching Daniel Tiger right now, right? So I thought, like I said, I was on the journey with you. When you started parenting, I know how old are you? Well, you may not want to say on air, and it's okay if you don't, but I couldn't tell quite how old your children are now, and please don't feel obligated to say.
I'll tell you, they're 6 and 8.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So my little girl is 3.5, and I can identify with the struggles that you were having just explaining what faith is. If there's a God out there, what does the God want from you? How do you know when there seem to be a mass of contradictions? What do you use to resolve the contradictions? Is it faith? Is it something more like humanism? These are things that we have to deal with children, teaching them to resolve conflicts in their lives. And I was on that journey with you too, because I want to raise a pro-social child. And it was clear in the book that you wanted that you actually are raising pro-social children. So
Some days. We'll see.
Well, and Matthew has a daughter who just entered university. That's college for you Americans out there that are listening.
Yes, mine's at the other end of the system, but yours is definitely a book I could have done with reading 10 years ago. It's definitely up there. And I need to get this out there. Listeners, if you don't know the book that we're talking about, if you haven't read it, link will be in the show notes to somewhere convenient where you can buy it. I do genuinely recommend Bekah's book. And there are multiple things I liked about the book. One of them is quite obvious that it crosses boundaries. You can be atheist or Christian and read it and still get out of it. And you probably, while it helps to have the kind of toxic evangelical background that we've all had, it's not essential to have that background in order to appreciate the book. So I really do like it. Your journalistic background definitely comes out in the book. The way you slip in references to research and to professionals talking about the details that you're going through at that time, and then you go back into your story again. Those kinds of things, only somebody with journalistic training can write that and do it smoothly. And this is why people who've got professional writing skills should write books, and people who don't should read them.
Thank you. I'm going to send that note to my former professors.
But leading on from the way Andrew was going in the conversation, though, what was the primary motivation into getting this book down and out?
Yes. Well, let me say something as a way of getting into that, responding to something you just said about you don't have to be you'll understand more and it'll resonate more deeply if you've been battered by evangelicalism, but you don't have to, and nor do you really have to be a parent.
Yes,
because
I didn't say that. Yes, I should have said that as well.
Well, and I say that to say that the title is Bringing Up Kids When Church Lets You Down. A lot of us are reparenting ourselves. So the kid that you're bringing up might be you. And the church has let you down if you are a citizen of the world at this point. I would say that the church's complicity with colonialism and racism and all of those things has really let all of us down. So this is a book for people who have been wounded and are still interacting with other people in the world as we look at the toxic effects of things that an errant church has done. And so that's why I wrote the book, is because I was in the United States. COVID was raging and Christians were leading the bad behavior on ignoring it. And Donald Trump was president. And I had been through this the last 4 years, like the rest of the world, of kind of being gobsmacked at the justifications for this man, and had watched a lot of people. I had already been on my, what we're calling now, I guess, the deconstruction journey. I'd already left the church and found my own little place to, relationship to it, my own relationship to faith and whatnot. But I was watching people who I never thought would leave the church, break ties over this. And I was watching the disillusionment just explode. And then when the George Floyd protests started happening and seeing the back and forth and the backlash, I just thought, well, it's all out there now. We need to talk about it. Like before, when you would try to say stuff like, I think the church has been a really detrimental influence in these arenas, politics, race, etc., you get a lot of static and fuzz about, well, is it really the church, or is it this, or is it that? And I think the Trump era just left. It is forcing a conversation that many people were unwilling to have. And for parents who are new to it or who have been going through it, if you have kids, this conversation happens in a particular way, because you're also trying to hold on to, what am I going to tell my kids about my changing beliefs? And okay, what did I actually quick remember what you actually benefited from, so that you can give your kids that, because you don't want to throw out everything and then realize 20 years in, oh, the reason I actually have hope in hard times is because I believe in a spiritual realm where there is a force that is for me and a higher power that is on my side, whatever. You don't want to, I didn't want to, in the name of being spiteful, deny my children some of the benefits that I did get from the faith I grew up with. So I felt like once I had them, there was this like, okay, now we have to really go back and look and be humble and say, wait, what do you owe to this? Like, what benefits did you receive? And how is it possible to pass those on without the toxic stuff in a world where the toxicity is so in your face? And yet here we are in the middle of COVID with anxiety raging, and I'm walking around the block saying like Bible verses to myself to try to calm down. So it was that tension. And then every single person I mentioned the book to was like, oh, I just had that conversation yesterday. Yeah, let's do it. So the publicist, the editor, the publisher, my agent, everybody was having that conversation. And that's why the book got published.
Right. Thank you. Looking at from this side of the Atlantic Ocean, looking at what happened under Trump and the noisy evangelicals' response to COVID bemused most of us over in this small island.
Yeah, part of my family is in Sweden, and we went to finally visit this summer after a long time of not seeing them. And we were out getting ice cream, and my cousin kind of pulled me aside, and he was like, what happened? He was just like, watching from over here, it has been so sad and so surreal. And he said, there's a smugness being European and kind of being like, oh, there they go, the wild Americans. But he said it was like watching a very terrible reality show for them.
But it was, wasn't it? Because we elected the worst, certainly in my lifetime, we elected the worst possible presidential candidate because right before him, we elected a black man twice.
Yes. Yes, it was backlash in every way.
Listeners, if you think I'm wrong, I'm willing to have that conversation. That's reasonpress@gmail.com. I stand by it. We elected the worst presidential candidate in my lifetime. I'm 54. I've seen a few of these characters. And by the way, don't do it again in 24, please.
Yeah. Let's not.
Yeah, that's a political interlude. This is not going to be the political show, much as we would love to do a political.
And yes, the political interlude, but I think it's appropriate because it fits the context of the book was political.
Yes, and you do hint a bit at that because it's obvious from the time period in which you wrote the book that the political background at the time has to have paid some kind of had some kind of feature in your motivations and why you wrote it. Going back though to the parenting aspect of that and the child aspect, my childhood memories I grew up in the missionary environment in Zambia, so I've got a different childhood to yourself and Andrew, but it's still under a very fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. So that's my background. But one of the overriding memories I have is fear of doing wrong and fear of authority. And that kind of stench comes up from the background of what you're writing against in your book. Did you feel that when you were writing the book?
Yes. At one point I was mid-writing and I was talking with my husband at night and said, I feel like the issue of authority is coming up a lot in this book and how we relate to authority. And I'm starting to think that maybe that one pastor who told me I had authority issues was not wrong. I think that they were merited. I think that what he would call authority issues, I would call perceptiveness. Yes, our relationship to authority, because in these very conservative environments, the chief virtue for a child is not kindness. It is not joy. It's not patience. It's obedience. And you just obey. And for women too, unfortunately, but especially for children. And so my relationship to authority was fear. If I don't obey, yes, that's definitely something, but also this dependence and it became very difficult to make my own decisions. So when I became an adult, a lot of people who grew up like this share like their 20s are kind of this muddy mess of looking for someone to tell them what to do and struggling to make big decisions because we've always had an authority telling us. And so you see a lot of them ending up in authoritarian churches and giving a lot of authority to pastors who will love to tell you who to marry, where to buy a house, how much to spend on a house. You have people going to the Dave Ramseys of the world that tell you how to budget. And a lot of that, if people have been helped by Dave Ramsey, that's between them and God, but they're wanting this authoritative voice. And a lot of times we're trained that authority should look and sound a certain way, usually like a extroverted white guy, and it should have teeth. And so we're looking for the consequences. How are they going to enforce this? And in the United States, that contributes to like our very violent culture and our very coercive state and our all sorts of things. So yes, all that to say, authority and our relationship to it is something we have to work out as parents because we are an authority in our children's life by nature of the fact that we're keeping them alive. And so how we embody that authority and what we want their relationship to be to it is absolutely critical to figuring out what we want like a post-evangelical parenting experience to look like.
I feel so validated by that. So sorry, as the English person here, Dave Ramsey, is that a name that's safe for me to Google, or is there lots of trauma behind that search link?
No, Google it. Which side of the line you're on?
Well, he teaches people how to manage their finances. That's his whole thing. He's like no credit cards, don't go into debt, that guy.
Right. Okay. If I feel up to it, there'll be a link in the show notes.
He's safe to Google. I'll tell you, I have people in my near extended family that are envelope carriers.
Oh yeah. Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Wow.
So there you go, Matthew. You've got
And
something
now I'm
to
intrigued. Now I'm
Oh,
intrigued,
it's
but
part.
also nervous. But going back to what you just said, though, I've managed to do something right with my daughter, and I did it without your book. And I'm fairly sure if there'd been books around like that to just poke me 10 years ago, I might have got there sooner. Because I'm fairly sure the route that I got to this with my daughter was bumpy and less than perfect.
well,
But I'm at a place with my daughter where she doesn't have the fear of me that I had of my parents, and I consider that a parenting win. And I think we should all encourage our children to answer us back. My daughter is very confident to tell me when I've messed up. And maybe it's not said kindly, but don't expect kindness from teenagers, expect honesty from teenagers. And that's what I get.
I think that's beautiful. And a friend of mine, when our kids were just a little bit younger, so, kindergarten-ish, she said, my children do not fear me. My parents would be so ashamed of me because my kids, and mine don't either. My kids do not fear me. And it is extremely inconvenient.
Yes. Yes.
You see how and why spanking and this idea that we should be in a battle with our children and we have to win. They have to know that any battle they pick will win. This idea that we're at odds with our kids at all times.
And aloof from them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And
I know because you are from Texas. I know how this works.
yes.
We're not even in conservative circles. You're not allowed to think of your child as a friend or them thinking of you as a friend. At least that is the culture I grew up in.
Right.
You're not a friend, you're a parent, as if one excludes the other.
It emphasizes the authority of the parent and not the relationship of the parent. It emphasizes the duties of the parent and the job of parenting and not the relationship. And every child development person I interviewed or book I read or whatever will tell you that the relationship is actually the most formative thing, that's actually, if what you're going to teach them is going to stick, that's what's important. Because fear, I say this all the time, that based on what everyone told me, how I synthesized it was, okay, I'm not going to be the scariest person in their life until, past a certain age. Their peers, they're going to want their peers' approval more than I am. They're going to go find a spouse. You're setting them up for really bad spouse making decisions, or partnerships. And so eventually those voices will matter more than mine. Their employer will probably matter more than me. And if it was fear that was making them listen to me, then no matter how good my advice was and no matter how valuable my values were, they're not going to stick.
Yeah. I think one of the moments for me that motivated my parenting style was the realization, well, for starters, being the father of a daughter is in itself a frightening experience, regardless, because you know what boys are like, and you live the rest of your life utterly petrified of the kind of boy that you were. That's just the curse of being the father of a daughter. There's just no way of getting around from that. But one of my motivations, again, it took me ages to get there, but was the realization that I hid things that I got up to from my parents, which were dangerous. And I would rather my daughter did not hide that kind of thing from me. So I need to cultivate a better relationship.
That's so important. I agree.
But again, there was fear motivated that. And if I'd been taught better parenting from the beginning, I wouldn't have needed that fear to motivate me to be a better father.
Sure. And I think that a lot of what I'm hoping people will take from the book is doing the work, realizing that they were formed by fear, they were formed by all this stuff, and doing the work to really get into that.
Yeah.
So that they can parent with relationship first. And
I want to pull in another possible reader here for the book, because there's a thing that happens on this show, Still Unbelievable, that I think happens in a lot of places, and that is male dominant voice, right? We interview a lot of guys, right? But there was an element of your book that I think everyone listening should read your book, to pull out this line of reasoning. It was really important to me, and that is how it is possible for women to contribute to the patriarchal culture that we have right now, the all white, all male, all married bit that I thought you explored in fascinating detail. And it was a perspective that I could not have read out of a book authored by a guy. Right? Because the insight about feminism and about the opportunity to pull away from the sort of patriarchal roots, and how our system has been set up by white men to privilege white men. Those weren't quite your words, but you know what I'm talking about here. And how you dissected women raising children in that culture and what they do as well was fascinating to me. And now I find myself looking at my own relationship and asking, how am I contributing to the status quo? I don't think I am much, honestly. I have that same authority problem that you do. But there was a voice in the book about how women experience the all white, all male, all married culture that I have never read anywhere else.
Oh, well, thank you. It's so funny because the parenting world is very interesting. There's a lot of like mommy memoir type stuff.
The mommy blogs and that kind of.
Yeah, and women are supposed to be kind of talking about their experience, and my book does that. But it also looks at how the parenting industrial complex, if you want to call it that, like the parenting business is largely male-led. And it's all these male, like throughout the 20th century, it grew as this kind of male scientist telling moms, here's your responsibilities. And there's a political arm to that as well, with politicians telling moms here, and women and wives, here's your job. So women end up being like the foot soldiers of a lot of cultural production and political movement without getting to have any kind of authority or say. And obviously, when you overlay race on top of this, it becomes even more dramatic in the way that people of color are co-opted into this agenda as well, and then exiled. And so I appreciate you calling that out, because I do think that in addition to the memoir element, I wanted to point out that as the foot soldiers, women have a unique perspective on a way out.
Thank you for tracking with me and being able to just get to the eloquent part of being able to say. I couldn't repeat what you said, so thank you for getting us there. Now, listeners, you can ignore everything I said and just listen to that. But it was important to me. It is a thing that I don't think I would have seen on my own. And it is a part of the book that is a surprisingly deep look and a surprisingly important revelation at looking behind the curtains on the society we have and how we got here, and about the fear that we have that keeps the status quo going.
Right.
So you talked a lot about racism. Matthew and I talk about that here on Still Unbelievable as much as we can. So that part of the book, the discussion of the status quo and how we got here, and how every person fits into that puzzle, I thought was really, really cleverly put together.
Thank you. That part of the book, like the framework. So the book's divided into like the framework, and then based on interviews, I do this middle part of reasons people left the church or reasons they felt left down. And then the end is like, oh, now because I'm a parent, this has come up. It's choosing a school, discipline, etc. And so that first framework section started out as one chapter. my editor was like, yeah, you're going to need to break that up and slow it down a little bit because there's a lot there. It's explaining how we got to where we are. And you see the threads woven through the entire American project, but also dating back to essentially the colonial project. So it goes way back.
As an aside on that bit, I loved the anecdote about the rainbow pegs. It was just beautiful about the, you know, the bit I mean, don't you, about the child and the colours according to what their behaviour was in the classroom.
Your 6-year-old,
Yes.
was she in
Yeah.
kindergarten at that
Kindergarten.
time?
It was
Yes,
it touched me. It was truly beautiful.
Thank you. Honestly, that anecdote is in there because it was one of those moments where I had to reckon with the things I said I believed versus the way I had been formed, and which one did I activate when all of my buttons were pushed: shame, fear, anger. Like when the negative emotions happened, which I'm sure y'all have talked about the fact that there's tons of baggage around negative emotions for Reformed evangelicals. But when those unruly emotions came up as a parent, which part of my identity, the self that I chose or the self that was placed on me? I went to, I mean, that anecdote has a happy ending, but the process of getting there was a big reason I got more intensive in like therapy and wanting to heal from a lot of this stuff.
Well, that was fascinating because that was in the run-up to that anecdote, we have the sort of perfection machine, right? We're supposed to be perfect parents, raising perfect children that are perfect students. And I identified with a lot of that. And I thought the resolution was one that more parents need to grasp themselves, because you were just talking about how fear of their parents could drive your children off. You know, they won't embrace your values. And this sort of perfection that we've been taught to seek contributes to this sort of slippery slope fallacy. If my child isn't perfect in kindergarten, then my child's not going to be perfect in elementary school, and then perfect in middle school, and then perfect in high school, and then I'm going to be a failure. And we lose track of raising a kid because we're pursuing perfection. And beautiful part of the book.
Thanks.
Yes, there's definitely a moral of being happy in ourselves in that bit, and it does come out of that. And that's one of the things, again, bringing it personal to me, I've had to learn about my daughter. My daughter has learned how to express herself now that she's left home and she's at university. She chooses her own clothes. She chooses her own other things. Her hair is no longer the colour it was when she was a little child, and I'm still working out how I feel about that, because she's got one side is one colour and the other side is the other colour. And and it's like, hang on a minute, this is not the nice young girl that I brought up. What's happening here? But she's comfortable in herself. You know, other people's opinion about how she looks isn't important because she likes how she looks.
Yeah, honestly, and if you're talking about raising a daughter in this world, like one of the most insidious and powerful things that the white American evangelical church, whatever you want to call it, that hegemonic force does is bring in the way you look. Like, I grew up with the way I looked being heavily spiritualized, the way you dress, the way you present yourself, the way you groom, all of that was tied up. And so like the ability to transgress rules that we were told were spiritual but actually aren't is like very important.
Yeah, and then these things play them out in very subtle ways. It was a while before I realized that I had never seen my mother in church without something on her head. And then when you start to unpack the evangelical theology, and you go, oh, there was a reason for that. And as a man, that completely passes me by.
Wow. Yeah.
And you talked about purity culture in that same section, which is part of this appearance.
Yeah.
There's a way that young women were supposed to present themselves. We're trying desperately not to put that baggage on our daughter, because what an awful way to have to live.
Right. It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So changing tack a little bit, a while back we mentioned and talked a little bit about deconstruction. So on the timeline of this, where does your own deconstruction from evangelical Christianity fit with the book?
So I've dispositionally was just a deconstruction waiting to happen. I'm a pleaser, and I was very like obedient and whatnot as a child, but I'm curious. I'm curious by nature and compassionate by nature and open to new experiences by nature. And so those are all very dangerous things that were just waiting for the authority to look the other way to kind of manifest. I would say that graduate school, I went to the London School of Economics, where there's one other Christian to be found. And so like no one was watching or caring. But it wasn't that I got up to mischief. It was that I started making friends who were of all different faiths, and they were wonderful people, and I loved them, and I wanted to hear what they had to say. And then I came back and started working for a church. So like had all of my experiences rattling around, and I kind of became that person who would like indulge a conversation about, Buddhism or something like that. But at the end of the day, I was going to make the orthodox choice. And then I'm getting more and more uncomfortable with like how classist my church was, how like white supremacy was kind of manifesting in these really obvious and eye-rolling ways. And I wasn't allowed to be ordained in that denomination. So there's kind of a glass ceiling on my career. There's all this just discomfort. And when I finally got uncomfortable enough, and I had my husband kind of nudging me like, hey, this all seems like bullshit. Sorry, I don't know if you're like...
No, that's fine. That's
okay.
very fine. I'll just tick the box when I publish it. That's fine.
We don't publish very many that are family friendly.
Don't have the little
you've done fine.
Well, so my husband was just like, no, this is ridiculous. And so I, emboldened by this other voice, I started pushing back and asking questions, which blew up in my face. And being young and idealistic, I'm sure I did not handle it well either, but led to just total parting of ways. And once, the way I put it in the book and the way it really was like the day I woke up and was no longer employed by the church, was no longer going to that church, it was like the video game plug had been pulled, and this whole little world that I was running around in with rules and goals and stars to collect and things had just dissolved. And I was like, oh, I guess I get to make it up from here. And things that I cared about couldn't matter anymore because the people who cared about them with me weren't part of my life. And the rebuilding process, like rebuilding my life, my community, my spiritual life, how I would see my family at church. So I had to like find other ways to see my family. And all of that allowed me to deconstruct in a kind of proactive, nice way. It wasn't like I didn't have to hide anything from anybody. I didn't have to like worry about getting found out. And that was all happening in like 2012. So a little over 10 years ago now. And I then started my career in journalism, which is what I'd gone to school to do. Had kids. So go on, life gets really chaotic and busy. And then it wasn't until I started talking to a bunch of people who were on that journey and realized like, oh, it wasn't just me and my bad experience. Like this is a growing number of people. The more the church doubles down on all of its hegemonic exercises of power, or, it's patriarchy, it's racism, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. This is going to be a common theme. And that's when the book came. So it took 10 years from pulling the plug to writing the book. But I would say that the groundwork had been laid before that.
Right. Okay. So your book is like a good cheese then.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Fine wine or good cheese.
Excellent. Just the vegan to bring up cheese, eh? I should have brought up wine. I made a mistake there.
So I was fascinated and laughing, not at you, but along with you, because I've been through some conservative kerfuffles of my own. And so you were talking about infant baptism.
Oh.
No, it's okay. I'm glad you're smiling. Smiling. Okay, that's good. Because Church of Christ, we're the hear, believe, repent, confess, and be baptized, every one of you, in the name of the Holy, in the name of Jesus Christ for remission of your sins crowd, right? We're those people.
Yeah.
And I was laughing along because you got to what is obviously the resolution that you could live with, but the tension that you must have been experiencing at that time, not being sure how to fit into the doctrinal demands that were being placed on you in your career, had to be pretty extraordinary, because where does your next paycheck come from if you can't just sign this confession of this particular kind of faith? I've been in some similar places, and now I wonder, where are you today? Because the book leads us through the very conservative upbringing. Tell your Presbyterian friends it's not unlike the Church of Christ, in case they're wondering. But today you're in a really different place. Are you still a Presbyterian? Do you claim a religious label of any kind?
Definitely
That's not a gotcha question.
No, that's fine. It's definitely not a Presbyterian. Gosh, no. I still consider myself a Christian, and I think there are a lot of people who would disagree with me about that. The language of Christianity and the idea of Jesus and a spirit and God is still very much that's how I envision God working. I do believe that there's a spiritual realm, and I do believe that, as it is described in the Bible, it gives us, the Christian Bible, we have tools for understanding it in a really meaningful way. And that's the language that God has been meeting me with for 39 years, and I'm good to keep it. I no longer believe that Christianity has the exclusive way to understand God and the spiritual realm. I no longer believe that there is that it's a belief centric, like that's doctrine centric, and that you have to have all the right answers in order to be considered a Christian. I think I probably am trending more universalist these days.
Hearing about Unitarianism when I read the end of the book. If this was a more
Yeah, Unitarian culture is not really my thing, but like a Richard Rohr type universalism is probably where I am. And as far as church attendance, like we do sometimes go, and just to give our kids that exposure to spiritual community, like, look, these are all people who are gathered because they love God. And so we're very picky about which church we go to, and we'll never be members of a church again, simply from a standpoint of binding our consciences. But we do want our children to understand that the way we're teaching them faith is something that is a larger tradition shared through history and acknowledged by people throughout the world. But we're also very open with them about explaining how other people know God.
I'd like to ask, if I may, and feel free to bat this one down if I'm overstretching, but in the deconstruction community in which we're part of, and I'm certainly part of, spousal relationships always struggle under deconstruction, and many don't make it. How did you guys navigate that, and what have you got to say on that part of your journey?
Oh, that is a good question. And it's his fault. He started it, so there's really not much you can do
Blame
now.
it on the man. Go on.
No, he was neither of us were the type. Actually, that's not true. In my most conservative, I was the type who could not have been in an interfaith marriage. My husband's disposition is just very practical. If it's not affecting our daily life, it's not something that we need to hammer out right this second. I would say he's still a more orthodox Christian than I am. Not Orthodox, big O, but little o Orthodox. Like, he still treats the Bible as the inerrant word of God. He would still say, like, believing in Jesus is, as we learned it as kids, is more, but he too is on a journey. Like, when I bring up themes of like universalism, he's like, okay, I'm not ready yet, but like, I'm going there with you. Socially, we're on the same page.
Yeah. Socially
affirming, he's far more liberal politically than I am, far more. He's like a hippie Christian. He's like,
the best
and
kind.
that works out really well for, a budding universalist. But I would say that where we disagree, neither one of us, or we've both kind of rejected this need to be right and need to be certain, and that's how it survives.
I think it's that being right bit that I get, because that was definitely the Christianity that I came in, and it's very liberating to drop that and go, yeah, okay, this could be wrong. I might change my mind. It all depends on the circumstances and what's presented to me, and I can be convinced by something that's presented to me. And taking that view is so refreshing and so beautiful. I can't believe it took me 40 years to realize it. Yeah.
This can be a very life-giving tradition, I think.
Yes.
When I'm encountering Jesus now, like in the Gospels, I couldn't touch my Bible for years until I reworked through some of those ideas, re-understood some words, going back and having to undo a lot of the way I learned to read the Bible and reading it differently and stuff. There's actually a lot of life to be had.
There is a phrase that has lived around the Still Unbelievable podcast for a while, but we haven't said it for a while, but it works for what you've just saying, and that's the cocaine of certainty.
That's such a great phrase. I love it.
I can't claim credit for that. The lovely Sarah is the one that brought that one up. But yeah, I think it seems to fit.
It is. It gives people that bump of aggression and delight that is not based in reality.
No, not at all.
It is. I read all kinds of books. I'm a fiction reader. I'm a nonfiction reader. I'm one of those guys that likes to sit around and read textbooks. I am endlessly fascinated by any set of words in a row, right? I'll read anything. But your book, and I mean this, it is the best nonfiction, non-textbook I've read in the last 12 months. I don't remember which ones I read before that. It may well be the best one I've read in the last.
I'll take 12 months.
And I will tell you that I finished your book last week, and I started rereading it on Saturday. And I hope that you will write more. I hope that you've got another book project.
I do. I just finished the first draft.
Okay, tell us about it.
Go on. Let's have a spoiler.
Oh yeah.
If you can, if you're willing.
I can. Oh no, are you kidding me? The publishers are like, promote early and often.
So tell us.
So it'll be another one with Erdmans, which I love. They fit so well with my disposition as a writer. They'll let me be a little more thinky than your average trade book, but not need to write a textbook. A little more conversational. And that's the same tone that they wanted for a book that looks at this one's kind of taking my journalism experience from the reporting that I've done on topics like immigration, COVID, abortion, CRT, critical race theory in schools, climate change, and mass shootings, and looking at how our divisiveness over this is really a result of how we tolerate suffering in other people. So looking at how the stories that we hear are stories about people's suffering, and what are the narratives that we have adopted culturally that allow us to be unmoved, and how we might change those.
That sounds right up our street. When it's ready, please, we'll come back. We'll talk to you
Absolutely. Again. I will do this anytime. It was very funny because they were like, okay, well, we want to keep that same tone, that kind of wry humor. And I was like, so you want a funny book about suffering? They were like, yes, please. If people are going to sit through it, then you should reward them with some laughs.
We have wanted to do a show on gun violence.
Mm.
And the problem that I have been having, if I'm being honest, and the listeners have heard that we're planning a show and are probably wondering, the reason the show hasn't landed is twofold. First, well, probably threefold. First, it's hard to find the right guests.
Mm.
Second, it is hard to find the right tone.
Mm-hmm.
And third, in the United States, there are so damned many mass shootings. But I want to do the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like it's a place that you have some interest. And I would really like to have your voice. If that is going to be a part of your next book, you will have done interesting research, and maybe we can figure out a way to release a show sometime around your next book. Do you have an idea about when? I realize author deadlines are, they're just sort of things people write on paper. We've done that. It's just sort of a thing we wrote on paper. When do you think your next book will be out?
Hard to say. They kept my first one on a pretty predictable schedule, so it'll probably be early 2024, I would guess. I live 90 miles from Uvalde, and so
wow.
I was there pretty quick. Not on the day of. I chose not to run down there and do the sidewalk reporting, but I spent my summer and fall doing stories out of there, and so I've done a pretty significant amount of writing already. That chapter of the book is pretty much going to be, it writes itself because I've spent a lot of time in that world lately.
I don't know how the people on scene let that unfold the way it did. And there is a skeptical part of me that is not very generous about why that was. And I don't think it's appropriate for me to say right now.
Yeah. The reporting that we've done has just uncovered all kinds of ineptitude, honestly. I think that there's some cynicism there for sure, and there's definitely questions about, well, what if it had been a different school? But
that was exactly what was in my head. Thank you.
Yeah, the people of Uvalde are asking that as well. From what we've seen, it was catastrophic unpreparedness, like not having the training or the resources available, and then the training. So like unclear chains of command. There wasn't enough ambulances on the scene. I did a story with the bus driver who ended up shuttling kids as an ambulance in her bus. So there's we can go on and on, but
well, if you're willing, there will be a show on gun violence, and would love to have your voice if you're
absolutely
willing. We'll talk about it as it gets closer, and if you've got.
Okay, right, before this chat gets too awkward to edit, is there anything more that needs to be said or asked before we wind up, Andrew?
I don't think so, except this. Do you have a regular platform? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok? Tell us where to find you.
I'm on Twitter and Instagram are probably your best bets. And then I have my website, BekahMcNeel.com, has fairly frequent blog posting and links to other podcasts that I'm on, links to where to buy the book, all that good stuff.
And of course, we have a last question that we ask of every guest here on Still Unbelievable. And that is, if you have a favorite Bible character, who is it and why?
So the Bible character that I go back to over and over is always Moses. I think that I have a secret dream of like leading a revolution, and I think it's a kind of a Moses. I like the calling that was on his life. I like what he did, I like what he was all about, but mostly I like I think I love that the writers of his story included a lot of the emotional journey that went with it, the reluctance, the resistance, the deals he tries to strike with God, the bargaining and whatnot.
Do you think the promised land is in Texas?
I do not. When I tell you I am 99% certain that it is not, and they will come for me and kick me out. No, I've seen too much of the world.
So I live in the peach state of Georgia, and I don't feel very welcome here either. But I did grow up in Alabama. So they kicked me out. Anyway, listeners, we have been chatting today with Bekah McNeel. Bekah, thank you. Thank you for your book, Raising Kids When Church Lets You Down. There will be a link in the show notes. If you want to get in touch with Bekah, reach out to her where she has mentioned. You can reach out to this show. Matthew, any last thoughts?
Not for the recording, no. Thank you. Thank you,
Bekah?
Bekah. It has actually been a genuine pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks, guys. This has been so much fun.
And that will do it for this episode of Still Unbelievable. We will see you next time. And until then, stay reasonable.
Great sign off.
You have been listening to a podcast from Reasonpress. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.